and you can kick off the meeting right after that.
I'm just going to see if Laura is available.
Okay, so we are live at this point.
Okay. Welcome to the Wenatchee School Board workshop on the proposed Equity Program Review contract. Bienvenidos al taller sobre el contrato propuesto de la revisión del programa de equidad. El taller se discutirá en inglés. Paul, now it's over to you and our guest from Education Northwest. Thank you.
Martin, thank you. Welcome, everybody. As Martin said, today is an opportunity for the board to interact with different members of the Education Northwest team. Back in November, early November, the board approved the district moving forward with Education Northwest. Today, the goals for today are to hear from Education Northwest. There are two different contract proposals sitting in front of you. The only difference in the two contracts are the visitations for on-ground focus groups. And then board had other questions around the impact of time for staff and students. So they'll review that as well, along with other topics that they're going to talk you through, from what is an equity audit to the work that they do. They'll also introduce their team. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Shannon, and she will take the presentation from here. Shannon?
Thank you very much, Paul, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for welcoming us and making this space to give us an opportunity to tell you more about our work and what we're looking forward to working with you on in the Wenatchee School District. So I'm going to start my slideshow here. And this is our agenda today. We do want to leave plenty of time for a discussion. We're really eager and interested to hear your thoughts and perspectives on the proposed work. We'll start off with some introductions, and then we'll walk you through an overview of our planned work and opportunities that we are suggesting for engaging community members and stakeholders throughout the project. And then we'll, of course, allow plenty of time for questions and discussion. So before we introduce our team, we were hoping to hear introductions from you. So if we could just go around and have board members, please let us know your name, your role, your interest in the Wenatchee School Board, and one thing that you are hoping the Wenatchee Equity Program Review will accomplish. We'd really love to hear your hopes and interests in the work before we dive into our piece. So name, something about your role, and one thing that you hope the Equity Program Review will accomplish. And if someone wants to start us off and then maybe just popcorn it to the next person, and we can go through all the board members.
If nobody else goes, I'll put my toe in the water first. I'm Martin Barron. I'm the president of the board. And my approach to equity is that, as much as anything, it's about using all of our resources, the ones that we see, the ones that we don't see. It's economic efficiency just as much as it is fairness. You put the two together.
Great, and maybe you can pass the baton to the next person so we can keep moving around the virtual room.
Laura Jakes, I'm the immediate past president on the board, and I guess I'm looking for an analysis or a statement of where we are, so that we know what it is that we might want to accomplish in the future.
I'll go next. My name is Maria Iniguez. I am currently the board vice president, and this equity is something I believe in, strongly believe in, and it's something that I'm looking forward for our district to have the audit because we do have a very diverse district in many different forms. And I am passionate about this topic because I strongly believe that this is where it begins. And this will get us to the next step of becoming a a high achieving district for all of our students.
Julie, do you want to go next?
Yep, I'm Julie Norton. I am the legislative rep for the board. I am sort of like Laura, interested to know where we're at and what, where we can move forward based on this.
And Catherine, your turn.
Hi, I'm Catherine Thomas. I am brand spanking newly elected to the board. I was not there for the vote on getting this equity audit going. And so I would just say that I am still just open to learning what it's all about, because this is a brand new idea and concept for me completely. So.
Great. Well, thank you. I love framing it as a place to start. And that's exactly where we can begin today. We'd like to tell you a little bit about Education Northwest, and we are lucky to have with us today our CEO, Patty Wood. So in a moment, I'm going to ask her to introduce herself and a little bit about our company. We work across the country, but we're really rooted in the Pacific Northwest since our founding as a company in the mid-1960s. So we've been around in these parts for a while, and Patty is a proud Washingtonian herself. And our primary region includes the 5 states in the Northwest region. And we are a research and professional services nonprofit organization. We're mission-driven to use evidence to help partners solve educational challenges and improve learning. So Patty, would you like to introduce yourself and say any of your thoughts you'd like people to know about Education Northwest and our mission driving this work?
Sure. So, hi, I'm Patty. I know a few of you, like Laura. I'm actually a former school board member from Kelso, so was very involved with WASDA, very involved there. In fact, I was at the conference last month doing a presentation there with my daughter, actually. And I'm now also have the honor of serving on the State Board of Education in Washington. And so my attendance here today is more, as much as me, since I'm a Washingtonian, I really like to see what we're doing in our own state, but it helps me keep in touch with learning and watching what we're doing, because our organization is sometimes hard to understand the work we do. As I explain to my family, sometimes we're the science behind education a lot of times. And we deliver this in kind of 2 different streams, through research and evaluation and through what we call sometimes boots on the ground, our technical assistance, which we're doing here with you, and providing the professional development and supports to strengthen education systems. And so our mission is to use evidence to help partners solve educational challenges to improve learning. And that's pretty much all what it is. And that's what we're here to do here, is to use evidence and data and science to help you improve your systems and learning. And I'm really excited to see us do work in my own home state of Washington. So, and thanks for having us in. I'm excited. And I was talking with Gene Sherritt this morning, because he's our board chair, actually. And Karina Vega Villa, also another Wenatcheean, is also on our board. So you are well represented on our board. And I saw it was snowing out there, and I was kind of jealous. But thank you, Shannon, for letting me introduce myself.
Thank you, Patty. And yes, I had also noticed the snow earlier. It looks pretty dramatic. So we were mentioning that this was a good day to do the meeting virtually. I'm glad nobody's out on the roads. Thank you very much, Patty. And we are going to introduce our team in a minute, but just wanted to highlight briefly our core values that we'll be coming back to these again and again throughout the scope of our work with you, throughout all the work that we do as an organization. We try to stay close to these core values of equity, of using evidence, of collaborating with stakeholders, making sure that we are not only promoting continuous learning among our partners, but also engaging in it ourselves. And of course, taking innovative and collaborative approaches to problem solving problems that come up as we go. So with that, a little bit about ourselves, and we are lucky to have our full team here on this call, at least at the beginning. A couple of folks might have to jump off a little bit early. But I can go ahead and go first since I'm already talking. My name is Shannon Davidson, and I will be co-leading this project with Mary, who will introduce herself in a second. I am a leader in applied research and evaluation at Education Northwest. I first started working there in 2015, and I have a real special interest in topics like inclusion and belonging and student health and well-being and how those intersect with learning. I think that a lot of people think of those aspects of learning as separate from academics, but I truly believe they are very complementary. And one thing I want to keep in mind as we go through talking about our equity program review is ways that we're going to draw upon those connections between inclusion and learning. I grew up in Hawaii, and I started out as a classroom teacher, so I'm really passionate about connecting teachers and classrooms and students with resources that will promote positive outcomes. I co-chair the regional board for a nonprofit called Playworks, which is all about learning through play and using time during resource to teach kids games and conflict resolution and social emotional skills for their development that helps them return to the classroom ready to learn. And I will, with that, I think pass it next to Mary, who is our co-lead.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Buenas tardes. I'm Mary Martinez. I work with this amazing team at Education Northwest. I feel very confident if you ask anyone at Education Northwest the best thing about working here, they would say that it's the people we work with. And I'm really looking forward to getting to work with you at Wenatchee. I've been at Education Northwest for 7 years. I came here after finishing my PhD in urban schooling at UCLA. My core area of expertise as a researcher and evaluator is all things related to immigrant education, language policy, and I'd say, like, for my why, that's all very personal for me. I grew up with a single Latina mother, Chicana, and both of my brothers dropped out of high school. I always wanted to improve education systems, and I've also been very involved in immigrant rights work throughout my career. So having the opportunity to work on education issues and really focus on improving systems and policies for kids who are immigrants, kids who are learning English, is very near and dear to my heart, and a really nice kind of blending of my professional and personal passions. So I think I'll be talking a little bit more about some of our previous equity work in Washington and equity reviews. What else? I am bilingual. I speak Spanish fluently. It was very important to my mother that we be bilingual. Many Chicanas of her generation didn't have that opportunity to attend bilingual programs, and I did. And I do try to keep up and practice when I can, but English is my first language. So I will pass it on to Karen.
Hola, buenas tardes. My name is Karen Perez, or Dr. Karen Perez. I'm originally from El Salvador, Central America, but grew up here in the Pacific Northwest. I have over 20 years experience in education, in the classroom, at the district level, in human resources, in supporting new teachers as a mentor, also as a district level administrator, overseeing dual language programs, multilingual education, and equity. And then also I've participated in several state level committees around multilingual learners, policies, and practices. And then I'm currently the vice president of the Oregon Association of Latino Administrators, and I serve on the Beaverton School Board. That's a city here in Oregon, so I can relate to your work on this board. At Northwest, I'm a leader for system and equity improvements. My areas of focus include services for multilingual students, diversifying the workforce, and the alignment of strategic plans, school improvements, and other services and instructional supports that are occurring in our districts and the various districts that we're working with. I'm currently doing this work with Edmonds School District in Washington, where we're aligning their strategic plan with their school improvement plans and their MTSS work. I've also led some of the work at Evergreen School District around culturally responsive education and the professional development they've been providing over there. And yeah, so that's my area. Those are some of my areas of focus, and maybe I'll pass it off to Manuel.
Thanks, Scott. Hi, everybody. My name is Manuel Vasquez. I'm a senior researcher at Education Northwest, and I've been at Education Northwest for almost 7 years now. And a lot of the work that I do has a focus on students classified as English learners. So helping and supporting students who are learning English and have a second home language as well. And I know a lot of my work is also motivated by my own personal experiences. When I was an immigrant from Mexico, I moved here when I was a child and grew up in the US. And those experiences have shaped a lot of my motivation, my reason for doing my work. And I primarily do more quantitative analysis work. So I do a lot of the crunching of the numbers and analysis, but I also do more interviewing and focus groups with members of the community as well. My first language is Spanish, so I expect to be doing some of that work here too, and look forward to doing that. Always great to reconnect with the community and learn more through that. So yeah, I'm excited to participate in this project. I'm looking forward to it. And I'll pass it over to San.
Hi, my name is Sun Young Yoon. I'm a senior researcher at Education Northwest. I grew up in Korea and I joined here 5 years ago now. My work focuses on educator training and pipeline. In the past 5 years, I worked with the Washington Professional Educator Center boards on diversifying educators in Washington by providing support for the statewide data analysis. And I also recently conducted the equity audit for Evergreen School District, and I'm very looking forward to working with you. Rebecca?
Yeah, thanks. My name is Rebecca Moyer. As I mentioned earlier, before some people hopped on the call, I am originally from Washington, from the Tacoma area. And I have a variety of friends and family members from the Wenatchee area as well. So I've spent some happy times in Wenatchee. A lot of my work is around kind of issues of inclusion and equity as well. I'm involved in our work as an organization as part of the Inclusionary Practices Project in Washington, helping to advocate and create environments for inclusionary practices for students with disabilities in the state of Washington. Other work focuses on English learners as well. Like Shannon, I originally started as a classroom teacher, but now I do kind of project coordination and support, and also do qualitative research. So focus groups, interviews, gathering information by kind of talking to people. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to kind of getting to know you all and getting to know Wenatchee from a little more of a professional aspect. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone for those introductions. And I believe I am passing this to Mary now to talk about some of our recent work of similar scope in Washington and beyond.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're happy to be able to bring to this effort is both regional and national experience with this kind of work. Sun mentioned last year, I think almost exactly a year ago, we were presenting our findings from the Evergreen Public Schools Equity Audit to the school board. And over the past year, it's been really exciting to see how that equity audit really did transform in tangible ways to changes in the district. They had a somewhat newly hired equity coordinator for the district who has really moved forward on action plans for all of the recommendations that were in the report. The district has adopted a new equity policy. And I heard a few of you earlier share about how an equity audit or review can provide a snapshot of where you are. As researchers, sometimes we talk about that as a baseline, and like, no, you need to know where you are to know where you're going. And that's one of the powerful things about having an intentional equity review. We are currently working in the Lower Merion School District, which is a suburban district outside of Philadelphia. And we have just started that work this fall. It's a pretty broad equity review that's looking at curriculum and instruction, professional development, and staffing, among other things. And then it's now been a few years since our work in North Shore School District, but I know Manuel probably remembers it well because it was a ton of data collection. We had a whole team, I feel like, living in Bothell for a short period of time. I think we did focus groups at every single school with parents, teachers, and students, not all of the grades, but I think upper elementary grades and up. So we are just delighted to be able to do more of this work in Washington State. And if any of you would like to see examples of any of the materials from those projects, I know we shared some early on, but we're always happy to share our prior work just to provide ideas and examples of the kinds of things that we can do. And I think now, what's the next slide? So I think we've been talking about some of these points already. This is a little bit what you can expect from us as your equity review partner. We do, I think, try to balance objectivity with being very transparent and honest about how we approach the work. So I know that you may have seen in our proposal, we said that research is generally not neutral, and that's a value. We recognize that each of us will bring personal perspectives and training that shape the kinds of questions we might decide to ask, the kinds of decisions we might make about what to dig into a little bit deeper in the data or themes to highlight. So as a researcher, I think what I try to always encourage teams to do is be really transparent about how we're making those decisions and to be collaborative and making sure that we're not asking the questions without a lot of coordination and collaboration from all of you. An equity audit can go in a lot of different directions. I think if you were to make a list of all the different possible topics for an equity review or equity audit, you could easily come up with 20 different areas. That's why having a clear focus is so important, I think, to have a very clear kind of North Star, what you hope to get out of this investment. But at the broadest level, generally equity reviews or equity audits are a systematic look into the school climate, culture, or district level climate or culture. Oftentimes we'll look at policies, whether they're things like discipline policies, employee personnel hiring policies, affirmative action policies, teacher placement policies, and always being attuned to the dimensions of race, gender, disability, and other factors. And sometimes the factors that we're looking at really depend on what we hear from all of you about what is important in your community and in your district to really pay attention to. But at the end of the day, we are an applied research and evaluation organization, which means we are not focused on creating beautiful reports just for the sake of having a beautiful report and telling a story. We want to provide something that is useful, actionable, and at the end of the day will help children in your district and young people to be successful in their lives, to have equitable access to learning opportunities. And we see the equity review as a tool to that end, to, hopefully, as I think we heard early on from your board president, identify resources as well as challenges and areas for growth in the district and in your community. And all of that, we're kind of always just anchored to our values. They're like our North Star, trying to increase access to excellent and equitable education opportunities for all students. And I think I'll turn it back over to Shannon now to speak a little bit more about the Wenatchee Equity Review.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. That was hopefully a chance to hear sort of in general terms about the benefits that can come from an equity program review, our motivation for wanting to be part of this project with you. So now we're going to spend a couple of minutes diving into some of the more specific parts of this particular project that we hope to embark on. So we, for the Wenatchee School District Equity Program Review, have identified 5 areas that we'll be looking at with our Equity Program Review lens. The first of these is curriculum policies, materials, and resources. So we'll be using some validated tools to take a deep dive as much as we can into the content of curriculum, hear perspectives from teachers, students, and families about their own experiences with the curriculum. We'll hopefully have a chance to interview some parents or other family members about their perceptions of the curriculum. And then we will also be looking at discipline policies, materials, and resources to uncover some areas where exclusionary discipline practices or other discipline may be disproportionately enacted among certain student populations, and try to understand the hows and the whys of that issue through reviewing policies, analyzing data, and hearing perspectives through surveys and focus groups. Thirdly, we'll be looking at instructional policies and teaching practices. This is a fairly broad topic, so we'll draw from some different data sources to try to learn more about teaching and how instructional policies are promoting inclusion, promoting equitable outcomes for all students. We'll do this through policy review, again, surveys and focus groups and interviews. You'll notice that across all these areas, we're really trying to kind of triangulate different data sources so that we can get a more nuanced and full textured picture of what's going on, so that instead of just looking at numbers in the data, we really do want to engage multiple perspectives in our qualitative data collection. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But fourth, we're going to look at hiring and recruitment policies to understand how the diversity of staff, instructional staff, educators in the region has evolved, and uncover opportunities for promoting a more diverse workforce. So we'll do that through interviewing the human resources director, analyzing staffing data, and finally, access to learning opportunities. This is really about understanding which students are involved in which courses. We heard there was also an interest in extracurricular participation among different student groups. So to the extent possible, we will also look at that, see who is taking the higher level AP honors courses, who's participating in standardized tests such as the ACT or SAT, and participation in these highly capable programs and advanced courses. So those are the 5 areas that we will be looking at. And you may notice that we started off calling this an equity audit. We've now been calling it an equity program review, and that came out of early conversations with our district point of contact, Superintendent Gordon and his team. The reason for that is that I want to emphasize what Mary said earlier, is that we are really trying to balance objectivity with our existing viewpoints on equity. We are coming in with a learning stance, and sometimes the word audit, we think, makes it sound as if this is a test, and that we're setting people up to either succeed or fail at the equity test. And that is really not our intention. We want to understand different perspectives from local partners, from community members, from students and families of different backgrounds and with different viewpoints. So to the extent possible, we're really going to try to maximize representation in our focus groups and interviews, and ensure that we're getting not just geographically, but across other demographic characteristics, get a really representative set of viewpoints so that we can get the best and most inclusive picture of where we are. And so we also heard that there were concerns about the burden of time, and we want to ensure that we'll be very sensitive about making sure that data collection is scheduled so that students and teachers would never be missing instructional time to participate in our focus groups or our interviews or to take our surveys. This phase of the work really shouldn't require a whole lot of time commitment, except for the time when the participants are either taking the survey or sitting down with us for an interview. This phase of the work is less intensive in that respect. of course, the work that comes next, which we hopefully will be setting your district up for beginning, will be the implementation of recommendations that may come out of this equity review. And that will be a different type of work, a different type of engagement and involvement. But for this particular phase, we really will be sensitive to not burden our respondents and our participants with too much time for participating. So we'll show you a timeline in a minute, but just wanted to share with you this graphic to kind of indicate that our process is intended to be cyclical. And I really liked, I think it was Maria talked about this work as a beginning. And so we hope to start with identifying and engaging partners, which is what we're here doing today, clarifying our purpose, coming up with a plan for ensuring that we communicate transparently with you throughout this process. We want to co-construct our plan with you. So, we have proposed a scope of work. We are going to refine that before we really dive in. We'll have a chance to hopefully share drafts of our instrumentation and our timeline, other aspects of the plan that need to be shared or revised as we go. Then we'll move into the data collection phase, but we'll still be collecting feedback as we go along. We'll begin conducting our document review first to ensure that we have context and information that will inform later phases of the data collection and the instruments that we create. When we analyze the data, we'll be employing our rigorous data methods, analytic methods, both qualitative and quantitative. And we have a really strong team here to do so. And we'll be sharing updates along the way. I'll get a little bit more into that in a second. And then for the reporting and disseminating and use phases of the work, again, we want to be very collaborative here and create some deliverables that are going to be useful, that are going to be easy to interpret, hopefully will be easy to make meaning out of together so that we can set you up for success in making program improvements based on some recommendations that come out of this work. So our role in this phase is really to do the learning and to share the learning. And then the next phases of implementation will come after this, and hopefully we'll set you up to do this same type of cycle again when it's time to implement changes. Here's our proposed timeline. This is going to be a pretty short in terms of the actual time from start to finish. So we're going to be working intensely with you from December through June. So we're here today introducing our project to you, eager to hear your feedback. We'll be working with the district to establish a sort of advisory and communication process as we move forward. We're going to start designing our instruments through January. On an ongoing basis, we will meet with the district, meet with you. We understand there are some tools that we can use to share progress updates as we go along, including school board meetings and newsletters. We'll have a chance to solicit feedback using a digital suggestion box, so the community can also have an opportunity to give us feedback along the way. January through March through April will really be our intense data collection period. And we're hoping at some point to do an in-person visit up to Wenatchee to be able to do focus groups in person with students, to meet you, to engage with the community face-to-face if possible. And then we'll be writing in May and June, and hopefully have some really exciting learning to share with you by the end of June. And now Mary's going to talk a little bit more about communication and stakeholder engagement.
Yes. I always like to say we have expertise, but we're not experts. So, we're really coming in from a place of service here to provide something that's going to be useful to you. And that's going to require not just this meeting today, but, ongoing communication already. We've had really excellent communication with district leadership, and that has helped us already decide that let's call this an equity program review rather than an equity audit, because language matters, and we want to make sure we start out on the right foot. What you can expect from us will be ongoing communication and regular updates about what we have completed, what's in progress, and what we're learning. And at times we'll be asking you to help us to interpret what we're learning and what that means. We will be providing those updates to our district contacts at least monthly, although based on what I'm seeing with the communication, it's been much more frequent. We've been in regular communication via email, meetings, and by phone. And then when it comes to messaging to students, families, educators, employees, we'll work with you to provide some public-facing updates that can go through some of your existing communication channels, like a newsletter. And as Shannon mentioned, we very much value providing ongoing opportunities for feedback. And this is actually something that came out of our work in the Lower Merion School District, because early on, some of the families and educators, mostly educators of color, were really voicing a desire to be more engaged in their district's equity audit process. So we created some opportunities for engagement through a digital suggestion box, a couple of meet and greet kind of listening sessions. We really prioritized making a site visit in person happen early on because we heard that that was really important to that community for us to come and listen and see with our eyes, you know, their schools and their community. And you know, we will certainly plan for a formal presentation at the end of this work to present the findings to the school board in a work session and really talk through the findings and recommendations and next steps. So for one of our recommendations, and of course, this is all contingent on our shifting public health considerations, you know, but if it is safe to do so, we would strongly recommend considering some in-person data collection through site visits. There's really no, Zoom is wonderful, and I have very much appreciated the opportunity to engage in more spaces via virtual connections. But I think especially when we're meeting with families and students, there's a real value to having some in-person interaction. We find that we have different conversations in person versus online. And one of the things that I value most about going and being on site in a district is some of the conversations you maybe didn't plan on. You know, you may go to school to do what you thought was going to be a family focus group, and on the way to the library, you have a conversation with an office administrator or a building principal and learn about things you maybe didn't even know to ask about over the course of the visit. So researchers, we might call those opportunistic interviews or conversations. So what we have in our revised scope is laying out what that might look like. We have a couple of different options that we've thought about. Generally, we would recommend a 4-day site visit, so there's enough time to do the focus groups with the students, with the administrators, would be small group or individual interviews, and community focus groups or meet and greets. So, and I think I've covered, you know, the general benefits, and I think we've also been talking kind of a lot. So I am happy to pause at any point and hear reactions or questions. Oh, perfect timing. Yes, here we are. This is kind of open time.
Yes, thank you, Marion. That was a lot coming at you. So we really are eager now to hear your questions, to hear your thoughts. This is a good time to ask us questions so that we can address them as a group. And I would also encourage the rest of our team, if anything occurred to you while Mary and I were talking that you'd like to add or clarify, please do speak up.
I quickly want to say thank you. Some of my questions have been partially answered already, but right now I'd like to turn it over to my fellow board members and let them in turn ask their questions. And whoever speaks first wins.
I heard you say that the final report would be due to the board in June, and there'd be ongoing communications and updates monthly. So are you anticipating that those updates are going to be in written form and just submitted to the board? Or are you going to be participating in board meetings and giving reports? What's that going to look like?
We are open to kind of refining those aspects of our communication plan. I think, different phases of the project would lend themselves to different types of feedback. So it could be that, one month, maybe just a brief written update would suffice. It could be that there's a particular, concern or question or exciting development in the project that we would like to share with the board and hear feedback on. So I think that there's some flexibility there in terms of what makes sense and what you feel is a good use of the board's time.
One of the, so in regards to the surveying of parents, in the original proposal we got it said online surveys. And my concern with that would be that, our demographic of our parents. So are we doing something other than online surveys for our district in general?
We certainly can, and our plan does involve translation as well. So our online surveys can be available in multiple languages. In terms of a paper survey, I think sometimes it makes sense to offer a paper version of a survey if there's a sort of a naturally occurring event or gathering or convening of parents where it would lend itself to collecting some data that way. So I think we could definitely be open to hearing ideas about that. I believe our proposed plan was primarily online, but if that is an area of concern and you think a different approach would work better, then this is exactly the kind of thing we'd like to know as we're working on finalizing our plan.
Yeah, I had a similar concern about both who will take a survey and then how will we encourage diverse participation of the survey. Whose responsibility is it to make sure people are completing it?
Yeah, thanks for your question and for your concern. As Shannon said, that sometimes paper surveys are a better option for some parent groups. And for example, maybe there's already an existing parent group for Spanish-speaking families, and there's a trusted coordinator for that group. Would they be able to bring a flyer with a QR code for the survey so that families who have a cell phone can quickly scan it and fill it out in 5 minutes during the meeting? Or would a paper-based survey work better? Sometimes families have lower levels of literacy in their home language and English. So in those cases, it might make more sense to walk through the survey with someone, and that could be one-on-one. It could be that we add on a little survey time to some of our family focus groups to ensure that we have good representation of your families and communities across the district, because we know email works really well for some parents and families, but it's not enough for everyone. So I think, again, the key just goes back to having good communication and collaboration so that we cannot just rely on email as the primary survey approach. But we do have really robust systems for email campaigns and making sure that we kind of balance being a little bit of a squeaky wheel, but not sending so many emails that it becomes really burdensome for people.
That's a really good question that Julie just brought up. Oftentimes what we see in our district, it's the same parents that, that are fairly engaged. And so how does the company broaden the target audience and to have that equal representation throughout our district? I agree with Mary. Oftentimes, our parents are illiterate in both Spanish and English. Sometimes, they speak their native South American dialect as well. So I think we are even though it's mainly Spanish and English, but we do have quite the diversity in language and literacy as well for our parents.
Yeah, and I think also, if someone gets an email from Mary or Shannon and they don't know us, it's not as likely to get a response. But I mean, if we have the opportunity to go and say Manuel does a focus group with the family and in his wonderful, polite way reminds them of the importance of sharing their experiences through a survey, we know they'll probably be more likely to respond to that survey if there's a connection, which is another, I think, real benefit to having a little bit of in-person time as part of the project.
Absolutely.
Or if there are, family groups and the leader of that group could be the name that sends the survey link, that could also be a way to kind of employ members of the community to help increase the response rates across the different groups. And, we'll be including questions about characteristics and region in the survey so that we'll be able to tell if there are giant, pockets of people missing across different characteristics. So hopefully we can be aware of that as data collection is progressing and try to correct those deficiencies if we do identify them.
Can you talk a little bit more about the focus groups? Because I know you mentioned it's not going to take away teaching time or learning time, but that's been part of my concern with running this maybe right now is we've asked our teachers to do a lot of tutoring and other things, and we want to make sure that we're getting a representative group of teachers and students with time to allocate to this. And I'm worried that A, if it's all online, and or B, if it takes a lot of time to do this thoughtfully, that we're adding a lot to an already pretty full plate. And then my other concern being, you mentioned this is just phase one. With phase two comes potentially even more work. So I've been a little concerned about what this means in terms of hours and time for our staff and students during this, still in COVID time.
Well, I think that's a good reason for wanting to come in person. I think that, we can, if we're there in person, we can connect more individually, we can bring snacks. We would plan probably to do student focus groups often during the lunch hour and provide lunch for participating students. If we were to meet with teachers, it would likely be before or after instructional time. And, again, provide some small incentives, snacks and, we don't have a plan in our proposal for monetary incentives, but we do, have ways to send an invitation out to make it sound like an inviting opportunity to participate, to lend their voice, and to contribute to a project that hopefully will have meaningful impact down the road for students and for educators. So I think it's, about starting the recruitment with enough time and making sure that we're sending the message out to as widely as possible, but also finding those opportunities to target groups of educators or students in a time that might be an already scheduled period where this would be something that we could do. So, we'll customize the recruitment as much as possible while also ensuring that we are attracting as broadly as we can. I mean, these are issues that are in every data collection process of every evaluation. So, we have a lot of tools and resources to draw from for attracting participants to join us.
Shannon or Mary, if I were a student or a teacher or a staff member, would I do multiple interviews or would I do one? What would be if I'm a student, what would be my general? I know everything is a little bit different, but what would my general commitment be? If I was a teacher, what would my general commitment if I chose to do a focus group?
Focus groups will generally not be more than 1 hour. So that would be the maximum time commitment. And the survey would probably take somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes to complete. So that would be the maximum time commitment if one were doing a survey. So, we're really talking about a maximum of 1 hour.
This is Karen, and I can relate to Board Member Norton's question. As a board member, we've had several situations where we've had surveys come in last year and this year with our students and staff. And we work closely with the people organizing it. So the organization with the school district to find a diversity of staff. So make sure that we're hitting different populations of staff and narrowing it down and then putting out the invites. And then for the focus groups, for example, and then working closely so that we aren't overburdening. And the same thing has happened like in my school district where I'm a school board member. We've had, even through COVID, I think that this is such an important topic to students and to the staff that there's many staff that want to participate and want to give their input so that it can shape the vision and the work that's going to move forward. And because of the experiences that they're having right now in providing education during this time of COVID, they have a lot of lived experiences that they want to ensure that we hear when we're doing this work, so that they're so committed to moving the work and student progress forward that my experiences, even at this time, that they're coming forward and wanting to participate. Of course, it's optional. And we work closely with the school districts to say, what are the different pockets of populations within your staff or within your student populations and grade levels, and then narrowing down the students. And even there's often relationships that the principal has or and the district level staff has with certain different groups of populations that they can connect us to. And that helps us build a larger variety of participants and making sure that we're not overburdening one particular group of staff more than another for that hour interview. So it takes a lot of coordination, but on our part with the district level staff, so that we don't overburden our staff, our students, or our teachers. And it seems to be that they really do want to participate because they want to help and have a voice in this work. They're so vested in the students and in their communities and in their schools that it's something that they want to participate in.
I might come in. My one reaction is that a lot of this is on us. This is a massive investment that we really want to succeed, and getting people to participate is going to require the district to make exceptional efforts on our side of the fence. And I think we're talking about making sure that the people who respond are representative, that they're a mix of questioners and believers, that they include people who don't normally have the opportunity or communication for access. And I appreciate the intentions that everybody expresses, but I don't think those are magic solutions. But so I think the burden has got to be a lot on the school district. In terms of the burden on staff and students, when they've got a lot to do, that's the same thing, to really be sensitive and try and work that out. My thought on that is we want to make sure that when somebody fills in a survey or is in a group, that they have time to consider and they have energy to think. And so this is really going to be hands-on work together. And what I said is that this has got to be this is a strategic-like issue that's going to have a lot of management downstream. So I don't know whether that helps or not, but I think that's putting a flavor on what I think we've been talking about, and recognizing that you don't just press a button. And we've got to make a commitment to do it that way. I have two kind of quick technical questions. In your previous work, I've seen how you do about a 5-year history of your statistics. Do you have a plan for dealing with the aberration of COVID years?
Obviously, the data, the numbers that come out of data during COVID years are going to be different. So that's something that we would acknowledge right off the bat. In this particular equity review, we are not actually looking at student achievement data. So that there's a little bit less of a concern about those number changes during the time of COVID-19. We will, of course, when we look at instructional policies and ask about teaching, we'll be able to, especially through our qualitative research, understand a little bit about how that functioned differently during COVID. And, I think it's important also to acknowledge that the changes brought by the COVID-19 pandemic are not sort of an aberration that's going to immediately correct itself now that, students are back in school. So I actually think of it as less of a temporary sort of blip in the data, but really more of a shift with ramifications, not just downstream, but also upstream. So, of course, we'll be able to present numerical data in a way that takes that into account and also it's why the qualitative data part of this is so important, to really understand what those experiences were like before, during, and ongoing into this pandemic. So it will definitely be acknowledged. Yeah, Mary?
Yeah,
clarify
just
what
to
you
add on to that. So this is a challenge that is quite widespread, that we are addressing across almost all of our projects at Education Northwest. And I think generally what you can expect from us is to give you a really frank assessment of what our options are as far as the years that we'll include and a recommendation. And I just did this last week. I often turn the question back over to the client. Option one, we can focus on all the years since assessments were canceled and, kind of just look at the most recent years. Or option two, we might, look 5 years back, but know that some of your time is going into analyzing data from a year that was an anomaly because school was largely online and maybe it doesn't seem like a good representation. So that's, I think, generally our approach. We try to lay out the options and what we see as the advantages and disadvantages of the different options. If we can provide a strong recommendation, we'll do that. Sometimes, each one has their merits and disadvantages. So I know it's not a very clear answer. You might have been like, we'll do 3 years of data. These are the years. But with the pandemic, it's been kind of a process of trying to figure out what the best approach is. We are always committed to making the best use possible of your investment and resources in the equity review. And so we don't want to put a lot of time into analyzing data from a year that you might feel won't add a lot of value to your district's planning moving forward.
Okay, I need you to clarify the data that you will be looking at, because I just heard you say that we're not going to look at any student achievement data. Is that correct?
That's correct. For the student aspect, we are focusing more on access to learning as opposed to achievement differences. So we're going to be looking more at course taking patterns and issues of access as opposed to achievement.
Do we not at some point need to tie it back to student achievement? Seems like a pretty important component of doing this work.
For us, we have all of our student achievement data that we've been presenting to the board. I can't remember, way back in May, we did a 5-year review of iReady and what we had of Smarter Balance. So we'll share all of that data with Education Northwest because I think we've made a the data is pretty clear where our students are achieving and who's achieving at each level. But that will be shared with Education Northwest.
Okay, so we analyzed the data in the various areas that you talked about earlier in your slide. And so I guess what I'm interested in is where's the research, when we get the data related to discipline, related to curriculum, related to, whatever the components are, where's the research that says, here's where you are, and if you do this to change it, then you're going to have a corresponding impact on student achievement? Because in my mind, that's what this is about. I mean, if we're saying that there are potential inequities in discrimination in the district that are causing students not to be successful,
and we get to the cause of what those are, in my mind, the big part of doing this work is to remove those barriers or revise those policies or ways of doing our work so that all students can be successful. So I guess I'm feeling a little bit like we're not connecting this to student achievement, and I'd like to see how we are going to do that because I think it's vitally important.
Thank you for that for that input. And in terms of uncovering the obstacles and the barriers, I mean, I think that the best way to get to addressing an obstacle or a challenge is to first understand where it is, who's being impacted, and then be able to have a discussion about the root causes and the potential recommendations. So that's where the kind of collaborative aspect of this comes in, is that we'll be able to first uncover, systematic patterns of access or of opportunity that we uncover in our data collection. And then it will really be a team effort with those of you who live in the district, who know the district, to make meaning out of what we learn and translate that into recommendations. I mean, we heard fairly clearly, I think, during our proposal phase that there was less interest in having us be heavily involved in the implementation step of this until we get through this learning phase, and then be able to talk about where to go after that. I'm not sure if that addresses your question exactly, or those of you who have been working in equity audits in other regions, I think may have some insights about addressing the student level data in different ways.
Well, and I do see it a little bit differently. We do have student outcomes in this equity review. We're just not looking at assessment data. That's something that we have not included in this equity review, and there are a lot of reasons for that. For one, Washington State has a really robust data dashboard, so all of you can easily look up assessment scores and those kinds of student outcomes without support from a consultant. That is a really nice thing about being in Washington State. The state has put together a nice dashboard. Many districts have to pay a consultant or a researcher quite a bit of hours to get access to that kind of information. And we don't want to put a lot of our analyst time into creating a data display for something that's publicly available. But to be more precise, you will come out of this equity review with a very rigorous analysis of student graduation rates, participation in AP, advanced courses, SAT, ACT participation, and participation in special programs, whether that's highly capable programs, special education programs for English learners. And if you look at the Evergreen report, you kind of see what kind of data display you might expect. So we will look at the breakdown by race and ethnicity and gender and those factors together. And sometimes that really tells us a lot of the story that we don't get otherwise, especially with discipline. That sometimes is where we really need to take a more intersectional approach to identify what is happening. And the research component is very much baked into your proposal and these focus areas. As education researchers, we know that these kind of 5 areas of the equity review are what move the dial for students. And it comes down to, there is a wide array of evidence on the added value of having culturally responsive instruction and curricula. That some of the most rigorous research in that area has come out of Stanford and looking at ethnic studies courses and how that actually increases achievement for all students, whether they are students who are students of color or white students. Exclusionary discipline, we don't just care about that because it's not right. It's students are losing time in the classroom when they're suspended or expelled. That is, from an equity perspective, learning loss kind of situation. And when it comes to recruitment and hiring, again, there is a pretty wide array of research demonstrating the value, not just in terms of how students feel, but in student achievement of having a diverse teaching force and having multilingual teachers who can communicate with students and families in multiple languages. So all of these things that we're looking at the equity review, they're not just questions that are interesting and important. They are things that we know can really impact achievement outcomes for all students. And we're happy to share more research. We love to read research, conduct research, talk about research, but you can be assured that everything that we're looking at does have a strong connection to student outcomes. And in the final report and our recommendations, we will make that connection very explicit. And we know that for this district, we want to focus on improving outcomes for all different student groups and making sure that the policies are really tied to the needs of different groups.
Would it be fair to say that the data is going to be focused on participation and every factor that either reduces or skews participation? And the expectation is that test results will respond to improved participation and access to opportunities. And then the onus is on the district to measure that very accurately afterwards, but that's the target.
Yeah, I think that's a nice way to describe it. Like if you were to build kind of like a logic model or a framework showing kind of all of the things that achievement result in these big test score gaps that we see, it's the learning kind of opportunities that are the big lever or thing that can influence those test scores. So yeah, we'll be looking more at the system and the things along the way that result in differences in achievement outcomes as measured by assessments or test scores.
So it's kind of structural. Yeah.
So it seems to me that after this report is delivered to us in June, and we're looking at graduation rates and advanced placement classes and the SATs and all that special programs and discipline data, that we will have another big step in the work to take place to analyze the data around achievement that we have and cross-reference that to the data that is it going to be quantitative data that we are being presented with, as in, I mean, graduation rates, that's pretty simple. We already have that. We can disaggregate that. That's not difficult to do. I guess I'm just kind of struggling with if the data isn't directly tied, it's tied to outcomes, but it's not tied to the bottom line of achievement. And really, that's a huge part of what our work is about, is making sure that our students are prepared to be successful in life. I guess I'm just missing where we tie the two things together, where we take assumptions from your work in June and apply it to whatever aspect of our district is necessary, and are able to tell the public that we predict that once we implement these things, we will experience the following results. Is that, I mean, do you get where I'm coming from at all on that? I don't feel like I'm out in left field, but maybe I am.
I'm not Education Northwest, but I'm going to go back to what I was thinking. We are not the study area to establish the links between participation and academic achievement. That's been done many, many times elsewhere. So our purpose is to see our structure, our status quo, where we're at, and then build up from that. Yes, the starting point for our quantitative academic achievements is really, really important. And I think looking forward, we absolutely need to track the implementation of anything that gets changed with whether we actually improve and get results. But I don't think we're going to gain much by looking back historically at ourselves, because all we've got would be, we don't have the other half of the question. The question is, over a period of years, exactly what have we done and not done? We see the results. We have a snapshot of where we are at right now, but we're not the study which has gone in depth and established the pattern? Does that, I'm going to ask our consultant experts whether that is a fair way of looking at it or not. And if not, I'll back off.
No, I think it's a great way to approach it. Basically, you know, what happens between when a student enters the education system and then ends at taking a test, there's so much that happens in between those two things, and it can feel sort of like a black box of different factors that are going to ultimately affect what that test score is, as well as a range of other outcomes. And so what we're trying to do is open up that box and look at these different mechanisms of participation, of access, of inclusion, of opportunity to learn, and try to understand those factors, because ultimately those are the levers that you as educators can pull to improve the outcomes downstream of assessment scores and of grades. So the more we can understand about the factors that are within our control as educators, the more kind of power you have to make meaningful changes. And that's what we're here to help you do, is open up that box and look at those different factors.
And Shannon, if I may.
Add on to that.
Oh, Patty, yes, please.
I'm sorry, as a Washingtonian too, I want to ask the board too. So what do you mean, Laura, by achievement? Because as we're looking this as a state, whether it's mastery-based achievement, student engagement, I saw earlier that one of the things that was important to you was engagement in extracurricular. And we all know that as students are engaged, they're more likely to achieve. But what is it, achievement? And I don't know Wenatchee well enough to know how you define achievement and success on this. But as Mary had pointed out, you know, if students are out because they're disciplined, they're not obviously going to be able to achieve because they won't be able to perform or engage. But what is it by achievement? Do you mean, is it engagement? Is it course attainment? Is it test scores? I mean, so that would also help us by every district has their goals for what they want their students to achieve, and it's different for every district. And so that would be helpful for us to understand that.
Well, I think that's a really good question, Patty. And I can't speak completely for the district or for any other board member except myself, but we've spent a lot of time talking about the importance of reading at grade level. We've talked a great deal about the importance of kindergarten readiness and, you know, being proficient at reading by the second grade and how that impacts the long-term success of people throughout their entire lives. So to me, you know, test scores, yes, those are one measurement that we need to focus on, but it's always been my belief that if we're focusing on students reading at grade level and numeracy, that if we've improved those things in grade school, particularly, that the outcome will be improve student achievement overall. So in my mind, we are engaging in this equity work to look at what components have that impact on creating a barrier for students to read at grade level in the early years in particular. And then if they aren't by, you know, middle or high school, where can we help remove barriers or provide supports to shore that up. So to me, those are the keys. And we also, of course, get evaluated by exterior sources. You know, we're often given grade levels, you know, A, B, C, D, we're graded by whatever institutions choose to declare themselves qualified to give those grades. And so if we are improving our system throughout K through 12 and even PK through 12, those scores, no matter what, no matter who's looking at us and what way they're looking at us, from the left or the right or the up or the down or the sideways or the diagonal, the results should be there that we've improved in every way if we improve our foundation.
And I would totally agree with Laura. I think for us, our big six that we have in our new strategic plan, from experiencing high quality instruction, receive high levels of social emotional support, read on grade level, ready for algebra, on track for graduation, and involved in real world and relevant learning is really where we're at. I think what we know is our current reality. We know our current reality on those. And what I heard is, here's our current reality, whatever it is, good, bad, or indifferent. But we know through research, there are a number of different strategies and ways to improve those. And most of them are from opportunities, the engagement, the availability to see oneself in the curriculum, kind of that windows and mirrors idea. So those are those pieces that we're really going to engage in research and understand our district, because we know our numbers. We know where we're at. We've shown our numbers. We know where students are achieving in every one of those areas, and it's why they're our focus, because we believe those, if we can do exactly what Laura said, we can focus on these different areas, we're gonna move things. But we also need to know our system. What is our system doing? What are those barriers? What are those obstacles for students to participate in extracurricular, for students to participate in grade level instruction, for students to be able to be in AP honors courses, and who's sitting in those classrooms? And how do we do this better as an organization, which will move those overall achievement numbers, our big six numbers? But this is truly systems work. There's not one lever, there's multiple levers, and we need to understand where we're currently sitting at.
I think, Paul, if this work, this equity audit is tied to those categories that we just mentioned, that you just mentioned, then that probably provides the missing link for me, because it ties back directly to our work. And that, in my mind, is what has been missing in this conversation, I think.
No, I appreciate that, Laura. Yeah, sometimes I got it in my brain, but I appreciate you pushing us on that piece, because that's ultimately what this is about. That each student has those opportunities for grade level instruction, that students have opportunities, whomever they are, to get into AP honor courses. And why are we not having those barriers or obstacles in front of kids? So yeah, ultimately, this is all tied to our strategic plan with these big six overarching outcomes that we believe by studying our system, we'll have a much better understanding of who we are, where we're at, and then eventually in that June time period, having a plan to say, here are the levers we need to push and move forward to create more opportunities to reduce the barriers to do this work. So thanks for that, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons.
Thank you, Laura. This is exactly the type of feedback that's helpful for the sort of framing and structure of what we do and how we message what we're doing. So I really appreciate that input.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons I'm passionate about this work is because it's hard for me to put it into words, just like you did, Laura or Paul. But being a factor of the public education system, just like Manuel mentioned earlier, I'm a native Spanish speaker, and just to look back at my experience in public education, was it a language barrier, or was it a special education disability? And I think audit or program reviews such as these just kind of chip away a little bit at a time. Is it really a language piece, or is it a discipline, or is it a special, or is it a disability? And so once we start identifying those missing links and changing the system, then it's gonna, the academic piece, the high achievement, we're giving the kids, our students, the tools that they need. This might not make any sense. In my head, it does. Like my experience in the system, it just, so I just see, the data is there. And when I look at it, it's gut wrenching. It really is. And so, like, I'll just leave it at that. Like I said, it's just I have a really hard time expressing it because I can only express it through my lived experiences, and I'm sure it's not unique. We have a lot of bilingual households in our district. Monolingual are students that migrate into the community. The ins and outs of our student population. So I'd be more than happy to share my personal experience even through the college system. I didn't see a teacher that looked like me until I was in college. And that's when I was taken by her and just I was like, oh my gosh, she's a professor. She has a PhD. I can do that. If we are given, our students are given those tools at a much earlier age, then that shift happens. And oftentimes we lose that through the system.
I appreciate that personal experience so much, Maria. And I just wanted to say that you are not the only person that I have heard that from, that students were steered towards special ed and 504, plans, not because they weren't and they didn't have the intellect, but it was a language issue and we didn't identify it or work with it properly. So I get what you're saying there.
I have another lighter technical question. It sounds like you pretty strongly recommend doing on-site visits and doing the second $10,000 extra. And it kind of makes sense to me. So I guess my one question of Education Northwest is, yes, you really believe that. And I'm guessing that you talk about like seeing people in the corridor, kicking the dirt in the schools, reading the body language. Is that the kind of thing that can make a subtle difference? Okay. And then for Paul, very quickly, we will fund, if it's a larger contract, use the same source of funding as we planned before for the original. Okay. And if you want to tell us more about what you feel would be the best way to do in person, I'm all ears.
Bring good snacks.
Yeah. Julie?
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know if we were going to finish that topic, but I do agree that this almost doesn't make sense if we're not going to do an on-site component. I mean, and if COVID gets in the way and we have to table it, I just want to see this done well. That's been my concern the whole time. This is so important. I just want to see it done well. I'm concerned about cramming it all into this this January to June timeframe. I see being on site essential to getting a feel for the culture and things in play. Because one of the questions I had was, a lot of our policies are just stock policies from OSPI. So how do we distinguish between a policy on paper and a practice that is impactful? Because I assume we're adopting very similar policies to a lot of schools in the state. So then is there an economy of scale if we want to talk about pricing this or whatnot, or saving some work or research? But I think the being on site piece is critical. But then getting to my other question that I was going to ask is, how do you distinguish between the policy on paper and something in practice? Because you may not, if it's an antiquated policy and we all know it, but we just haven't been following it because it's so antiquated, or if it's what the state is putting out there, so we assume it's good to go. How does that interplay work?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. And we will ensure that we're focusing your resources on policies that you will have ultimately interest and ability to implement changes to, or to continue to improve. That's not to say that what we learn from Wenatchee School District will not be of interest to others in the state. I mean, this is a large, I think, ongoing movement, not just in Washington, but other states, of wanting to understand these system level changes that may need to be made. But it's why the interviews, I think, are so important, and our qualitative data collection that goes along with our document review, to understand what are the things that can be changed and the things that are unique to your school district. as opposed to being a sort of a policy that you don't really have the control or the power to alter.
Well, the good news is that our model policies come from WASDA and our colleagues at the state level, not from OSPI, which is a more onerous, thing to try to change. But have you had any success with districts that you've worked with in Washington State going back to WASDA and having any impact on policy changes there?
I'm going to turn this to the Evergreen team to see if they want to, anyone from the Evergreen team wants to give us a sort of an implementation update.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the question. I think I would need to follow up with our contacts at Evergreen to find out, because I don't, any follow up with WASDA I have not heard about, but it doesn't mean it hasn't happened.
And I suspect that Laura and others are more familiar with WASDA right now, but some of their more recent surveys, policies have been more structural along equity policies. They've been more guidelines, and there's been more flexibility I've seen in them. And so when the state has required some policies around equity, they've been more frameworks, and there's been a lot of ability for the local districts to nuance those, and whether the local district does or not, that's up to each local district. So while some of the policies are very prescribed, others I've noticed recently along equity and delivering instructions are being a little more flexible.
All right, board. It is 2:30 if I'm reading my clock behind my head fairly accurately. What I'm hearing is I'm going to put the second contract on there, the contract with on-site focus groups for the board. The board will take action on that tomorrow night. But that's what I've heard from the conversation, and the board, like I said, will take action on that tomorrow night.
Can I ask a question? Sorry. One of the pieces, I didn't know if we were going to have a chance to talk about it as a board later before it goes back to the consultants for more fine tuning on the contract, but I did have questions about the pricing, because I noticed it was fixed fee every month versus like a work for performance. Mm-hmm. My preference would be to see it be a not exceed a certain amount, and then we're billed for work as it's performed during the month, or on a monthly basis as it's performed until we hit whatever the budget amount is. And I also had questions because we're not starting until January. This had the first installment due in December before we've even approved anything. So I just was
Patty, I'll probably hand that one to the boss. Unless anybody else wants to answer that. Is there a different way to format that contract? More along of what Julie said, that we will approve, the board will approve up to, don't take this exact number, 180,000 or whatever that is, with the additional 10,000. A different way of writing that contract. So I'll hand it to you, Patty.
I'm going to have to hand it back to Shannon, because we have very many different ways of doing our contracts. Some are cost reimbursable, some are fixed price, and I don't know the particular details of this contract, which Shannon will, so I will defer over to her.
There is, I would say, a little bit more common than I think what you were just describing, Julie, of kind of paying by the month, would be rather tying each invoice to a specific deliverable. So that would be a different way that we could do it, as opposed to, fixed installments, which it sounds like you would rather not structure it that way. So I think it would be probably a more common alternative would be to tie the invoices to specific deliverables. So if that's something that the board wants, I could take the contract back to our finance department and see if we can structure it that way.
Makes sense to me.
Okay. Shannon, would you do that?
Sure.
I do have another question in our amendment to the contract or the second phase or whatever we're calling this, can there be any reference back to our strategic priorities and in the end tying the outcomes that you are looking for to the strategic priorities of the board?
Sure, we can add a bit more language about that.
Thank you.
Is this something that you would need by tomorrow's board meeting?
Yes.
Okay. I will do my best.
When I was looking, this is Karen, when I was looking through the strategic priorities, like there's some, for example, in the thriving environment, we have priorities that are action steps and practices. Some of, like for that first one, there's a lot of HR kind of pieces on the far right column of that one, that first priority document of thriving environment, that it would tie some of these pieces. And when I look through some of the others, there's some pieces that will tie in more directly, but if we were to look at, for example, ready for algebra, we could look at access to some classes, but I don't know that we would actually be able to tie it. And this is from what I've read through the priority list, like exactly to each one of those 6 priorities. But I think that it can be structured in a way that makes sense with the 6 priorities. I don't know if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I have just a quick question in regards to the interviews. Is there a component in there that will do parent interviews?
Yes, that is something that we did decide to add, that will be included in that sort of revised scope. So I think we decided when we are up there in person, we will prioritize meeting with families, and if we need to do more of the administrator interviews virtually, we can do that. That it would be better to have the face-to-face with families.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to try to get those adjustments on the board for tomorrow.
And Paul, I think under certain circumstances, we can distinguish between board and giving administration a certain amount of technical discretion when we go into contract.
Okay.
Just since I think we're interested in a timeline. Now, obviously, I'm only speaking now. It would have to be debated at the board when we actually look at it as an action item, if that was an issue for my colleagues.
I think I can work with Education Northwest to do exactly what the board's asking and get a contract that would represent what I heard the board today say.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody, new friends and old ones, for participating and doing this today. Appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you very much.
Shannon and